The kitchen light flickered faintly as Jack Monroe poured himself a cup of coffee. The drip of the old machine was the only sound in the house aside from the ticking of the wall clock and the distant groan of morning wind through cracked window panes. The kitchen table was set for two, though one chair hadn't been used in nearly 3 years. Steam rose from the chipped mug in his hands. He didn't drink it right away, just stared into the dark swirl as if waiting for something to rise out of it. Across from him, the chair remained empty, draped in the soft gray shawl that used to hang over his wife's shoulders. Her photo, framed in pressed wood, sat on the mantel just beyond the kitchen arch, smiling like it hadn't known the end would come so early. The house was clean, but not tidy. A certain kind of order existed only in grief. A coat hung in the wrong place, a drawer never fully closed, the television remote always on her side of the couch. On the counter, a calendar curled at the edges. Today's date was marked in red ink. Birthday. Just the letter. That's all he could bring himself to write now. He ran a calloused finger across the word and exhaled through his nose, heavy and tired. Another year. Another trip to his sister's, because she insisted on not letting him sit around and rot like the house. Jack packed lightly. Just a duffel with worn shirts and socks, a faded paperback novel, and a photo of his wife he kept wrapped in a sock at the bottom, like something sacred. He locked the door behind him, turned once to glance at the porch, and then started the long walk to the station. The wind pushed gently at his back as if nudging him forward. The road was quiet, lined with drowsy trees and mailboxes leaning slightly from years of wear. When the station came into view, just a cracked bench and a rusty timetable nailed to a pole, he didn't expect anything more than the usual. A long ride, a few stairs, and silence. He was used to silence. But silence, that day, was not what waited for him at the station. The train came to a groaning halt, its brakes hissing like an old man settling into a chair. Dust kicked up around the platform, catching the mid-afternoon sun in a golden haze. Jack stepped down from the carriage, boots hitting the worn concrete with a quiet thud. He adjusted his duffel on his shoulder and looked around. The station was barely more than a bench, a cracked timetable, and a small shelter with peeling paint and a roof that threatened to collapse with the next hard wind. And then he saw her. She was sitting on the far end of the bench, a vision both strange and deeply sad, still in a wedding dress, crumpled around her like a forgotten bouquet. Her veil had slipped halfway down her back. Makeup had run in streaks down her cheeks, though she didn't seem to care. One white shoe dangled from her foot while the other sat on the gravel below, kicked off in some moment of despair. A small, cheap suitcase sat at her feet, covered in stickers that tried too hard to be cheerful. Jack slowed as he approached. Her eyes were glassy, fixed somewhere in the distance past the tracks, and she didn't acknowledge him until he sat on the opposite side of the bench. He gave her space, more than just physical, emotional, human. She sniffled, wiped her nose on a tissue balled up in her hand, then noticed him. "Don't say it," she said hoarsely. "I wasn't going to," Jack replied. "Good," she muttered. "Already had 2 conductors ask if I needed help, and one lady gave me this look like I was contagious." Jack opened his bag, unwrapped a sandwich from wax paper, and handed it to her. "Ham and mustard. It's not fancy." She hesitated. Her pride flared for a second, then gave in. She took it with both hands like it might fall apart, as if no one had offered her anything today except pity. "Thanks," she said, after a bite. "Tastes like a Tuesday." He smiled. "It is Tuesday." She laughed through her nose, surprising herself. "Guess I lost track." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The wind rustled her veil and tugged at the edge of Jack's coat. A train wailed in the far distance. He looked at her sideways, studying the bruised elegance in her features, the strong line of her jaw, the way her fingers still clutched the sandwich like it might be taken back. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer at first. Then, "He didn't show up. His mom told him I'd make a fool of him walking down the aisle in this dress. Said I looked like a cake left out in the rain." Her jaw tightened. He believed her. Jack nodded once. "Then he's a fool." She looked at him now, really looked. "Why do you care?" "I don't know if I do," Jack said. "But I know what it feels like to be left behind." Something shifted in her eyes. Not quite trust, but a softening. She wiped a tear before it fell, smudging her already ruined makeup. "Evelyn," she said finally. "Jack." She tilted her head, skeptical. "You always hand out sandwiches to crying brides at train stations." "No," Jack said. "This is a first." She gave a tired, crooked smile. "Well, You picked a good one. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced. He looked out over the empty tracks stretching into nowhere. I'd marry you right now if I could, he said, the words dropping out of his mouth like stones into a well. No joke, no smirk, just quiet conviction. Evelyn froze, unsure if she heard him right. What? He turned to her. I said, I'd marry you. Right here. The world seemed to still around them. The dust, the sun, the quiet screech of metal settling. Evelyn stared at him, stunned into silence. You're serious, she whispered. I've got no reason to lie, Jack said. Not anymore. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands, at the wrinkled satin and dirt-smudged hem of her dress. Then back at him. Well, she said finally, you sure know how to rescue a woman from rock bottom. She didn't say yes, but she didn't walk away either. The office smelled like old wood, spilled coffee, and the kind of paperwork no one had touched in years. A dusty ceiling fan creaked above them, barely stirring the warm air. The station master, a wiry man in suspenders who looked like he'd been part of the furniture since the war, squinted at Jack over his reading glasses. You want to do what, now? Jack stood calmly in the middle of the cramped room, his duffel at his feet, his hands folded in front of him. Evelyn hovered behind him, still in her wedding dress, now slightly cleaner after she'd wiped off the train bench grime with an old towel someone had handed her. She looked nervous, like she was waiting for someone to shout at her again. Jack didn't flinch. We want to get married. Right now. The station master scratched his head and looked at Evelyn. Miss, are you sure? Evelyn took a deep breath. I was supposed to be married today. I have the dress, I have the vows. Just didn't have the groom. The station master blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the moment. Well, we're not exactly a chapel here. Jack nodded. I figured. But you've got a phone. There's a preacher 2 towns over, isn't there? We passed his church on the line. You know him. I know him. Old Reverend Sawyer. Retired. Grows squash now. Call him, Jack said. Please. An hour later, Reverend Sawyer pulled up in a rusted pickup truck, Bible in one hand and a sweat-stained hat in the other. He looked at Jack, looked at Evelyn, looked at the station master, then slowly broke into a toothy grin. Well, he said, I'll be damned. Haven't done a wedding since my knees gave out. Let's give the Lord something to smile about. They gathered just outside the office, near the edge of the platform where the gravel met the dry grass. The sun had begun to dip lower, casting long shadows across the tracks. A few curious passengers who hadn't caught their train yet trickled over, drawn by the sight of Evelyn's white dress and the sudden appearance of a preacher. Jack pulled something from his duffel, a dollar store vending machine ring in a plastic capsule. He held it out to her like it was gold. Evelyn laughed, then covered her mouth with her hand, eyes watering. You're serious about everything, aren't you? He smiled softly. I am. Reverend Sawyer opened his Bible and cleared his throat. We are gathered here in what some might call the least likely of places, he said, but the Lord never needed a church roof to bless 2 souls. Love finds its own altar. Jack and Evelyn stood facing each other, hands trembling slightly as they laced together. Her veil fluttered behind her in the breeze. His coat was still dusty from the road. Do you, Jack Monroe, take Evelyn Claire Harding, to be your lawfully wedded wife? Sawyer's voice was surprisingly strong. I do, Jack said, without hesitation. And do you, Evelyn, take Jack to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked up at him, voice breaking just slightly. I do. The preacher smiled. Then by the power vested in me by the state and by the grace that's carried us all through worse days than this, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. They did, softly at first, then with the kind of relief that comes when 2 people realize they're no longer drifting alone. Applause rose from the small crowd. Strangers, mostly, but in that moment, witnesses. A train whistle blew in the distance, closer now. The next train was coming. Evelyn turned to look, then glanced at Jack. That's your ride, isn't it? Jack looked at the oncoming train, then back at her. Was. She smiled, slipped her hand into his, and they stood there together as the train rolled past them, its wind tossing her veil, its noise drowning out the last remnants of doubt. They had no tickets, no luggage, but they had each other. And that was enough. The sun was sinking low over the hills, casting a warm amber glow across the front porch of Jack's house. It didn't look like much from the outside. Faded paint, a few cracked shutters, but the garden had come back to life in the past few weeks. Evelyn had coaxed color from the soil like it was a language only she knew how to speak. Pansies and marigolds lined the walkway, and the porch rail now held hanging baskets that swung gently in the summer breeze. Inside, the kitchen was alive with the smell of rising dough and roasted garlic. Evelyn stood barefoot on the old tiled floor, flour dusting her cheek, her hands deep in a mixing bowl. She hummed softly under her breath, something old and wordless. The radio on the windowsill crackled with a country love song, the kind she used to roll her eyes at but now found oddly fitting. Jack sat at the table, sanding down an old picture frame he'd found in the attic. A small black and white photo of his wife, his first wife, still rested on the mantel, but now, beside it, was a newer photo, Evelyn in her wrinkled wedding dress, laughing mid-sentence, hair wild in the wind. No veil, no makeup. Just her. Real. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. It buzzed with the subtle rhythm of shared living, the creak of floorboards beneath two sets of feet, the clash of opinions about where the salt should go, the low murmur of evening conversation, often about nothing at all. Outside, a group of neighborhood kids darted through the yard, chasing a soccer ball and shouting over each other. Jack had fixed the old porch swing, and it now swayed gently with a young girl and her dog curled up together on it, both watching Evelyn through the window like she might be baking just for them. A neighbor stopped by with a casserole and a grin. "Word around town is you two got married on the platform," she said with a laugh. "I told Earl that was either the start of a tragedy or the best damn story I've heard in 20 years. Evelyn laughed, brushing her hands off on a dish towel. "Maybe both," she said. "But the pie is still warm." Jack stepped out onto the porch to sit with her as twilight deepened. They watched the fireflies begin to blink in the grass like slow sparks from an old fire. "You still think I'm crazy?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. He didn't answer right away. He reached over, took her hand, and kissed her fingers gently, flower and all. "I think you were the bravest person I ever met," he said. "And I think you saved me." She tilted her head. "That's not how I remember it." He chuckled. "Guess we saved each other." A soft breeze rustled the trees. The house creaked, not in protest, but in comfort, as if it had been waiting all this time to be full again. From the kitchen came the beep of the timer. Evelyn groaned and stood up, brushing off her apron. "I better not burn this. I'm trying to impress your neighbors." Jack leaned back, watching her move. "You impressed me the moment you didn't get on that train." She paused in the doorway and looked back at him. Her eyes shimmered, catching the last of the sunset. "You didn't either." Then she was gone, back into the kitchen, back into their life. And Jack sat there on the porch, the swing creaking softly beside him, feeling for the first time in years like he was finally home.